Are you ready to go, son?
I am ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. We did not just finish watching a race. In fact, there will be no race for about 3 months. Patrick's son, I have another surprise for you. Not just a Christmas surprise. This was supposed to be our F1 2023 year in review episode, but I think we can put that off because I just saw that Otani, I think that's how he pronounces his name, just signed with the LA Dodgers for $700 million. I mean, that puts him in, legitimate James Bond villain wealth levels. And I'm seeing all these golfers getting offered just outrageous amounts of money to join the new LIV Golf Tour. So I thought we would do a very special episode. What happens if LIV Golf, LIV Golf, or its Saudi-backed equivalent, were to do the same but for Formula One? So I know I sprang this on you, but golf is not at all like Formula One. Only very, very few people will ever participate in Formula One, and almost no one will drive in Formula One. But golf's crazy. I mean, you look at golf and it's like, it's Trump's best thing ever, and it's Obama's best thing ever. You'll see 20-something dudes having a great time on the golf course and 80-year-old women. It's done all around the world. Now, I'm not a golfer, but I've got a lady friend who's a golfer, and so I'm learning more about this LIV takeover. And LIV stands for 54, which I think is something to do with if you birdie every hole. I don't know golf. But it's a challenge to the PGA and the European equivalent because it's got Saudi billions, and they're basically wanting to take over the sport of golf. And I thought, well, what happens if they decide, let's take over Formula One or make a competitor to Formula One? Are you okay with doing this show, Patrick?
Yeah, this is interesting. It's an interesting posit that you have, this question about how people with a lot of money can make things happen. And, right now, in this day and age, the Saudis, big oil producing countries, they have a lot of money, and they seem very interested in all kinds of sports. We had Qatar hosting the FIFA World Cup last year. Lots of stuff going on in the Middle East, in these countries. We have a lot of races in Formula One there every year, and it seems very plausible that, they may not just want a few races every year. They may want to start their own motorsport venture.
It mildly fascinates me. This is tangential. That we're in the third decade of the 21st century, and oil and gas is what rules the world economy. That doesn't seem plausible on any timeline, and yet it's true. LIV Golf, it's backed by Saudi money, billions and billions of dollars, and they decided to start poaching top golf players, just start spreading crazy amounts of money around. They've started new golf tournaments, and they're altering the rules. I think more rowdy fans, more fan interaction. Instead of 4-day tournaments, it'll be 3-day tournaments. I don't know if they've got other rules, but it could work. This could be a legitimate thing that happens. I mean, golf, as I said, golf is not like Formula One in the fact that everybody plays golf, it seems like. and they can play it from, the age of 10 to 100. But as far as golf tournaments, you know, we're seeing now Liberty Media, an American corporation, bought Formula One. But Formula One also has these old European ties with FIA, the Racing Association, and a lot of times they disagree on stuff. You could see there's an opportunity for a split there. We also know that the talent pool is just insanely good. There's only 20 drivers. And if we get an 11th team, let's say the Andretti team enters, there's 22 drivers. A couple of them might be driving there because they're very good and have a lot of money behind them, but maybe not the very best. And so there's reserve drivers. There are, Indy drivers, the sim racers, the F2 guys. There's a lot of talent out there. I don't know. It just seems like this could work. It seems like it's almost an inevitability that some group, let's say backed with billions, decides to make an F1 competitor or just decides to just go after F1.
Yeah, it seems not out of the realm of possibility in any sense. There's frequently disagreements, like you mentioned, between Formula One Motorsport and FIA, sort of the overall ruling body of the sport. There are a lot of people that are, getting upset or having, taking issues with some of the things that Formula One is trying to do in terms of rules and regulations and how they see the sport moving forward. And, I think there's a good opportunity for somebody to basically make a split. We keep saying they could add an 11th team. There have been talks of other OEMs, GM, with Cadillac, Ford getting into the sport. Honda's always in question of these car brands. Deciding it's a lot of money and time and effort for us to get into Formula One. But if somebody says, hey, let's do this other motorsport adventure and we'll cover you for the first 3 years. You don't have to do anything out of pocket. Just build a car. That seems like super reasonable to me.
Yeah.
And, it seems like a lot easier to convince people to come over when they don't really have to put a whole lot on the table.
I think one of the surprising things to me about sports, and if you're someone of my age, is just the amount of money, just the insane amounts of money. I mean, most of my sports heroes made in their lifetime less than some of the top athletes make in salary, not in anything else, in salary in a month. And these guys were just heroes of their sport. In baseball and football, for example, even back in the old Indy days when I would watch Indy and NASCAR. And the money just doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. I mean, gambling now, sports gambling is legalized almost all throughout America. That's a completely new thing. And we have these old networks like CBS and Fox, and then these new, well-funded streaming networks like Apple and Netflix, all realizing that in a world where everything is competing for our attention, sports dominates. And so they're just throwing out just billions in cash. Apple, we hear rumors, $2 billion for F1 streaming rights. The new NBA broadcast rights, all of this. It's just crazy money. And then you think, well, are there either just venture groups or something like LIV backed by Saudi money that might just make a play? So, but I want to move away from the theoretical. Well, I guess maybe into a new theoretical, which is, one of the things that has shocked folks about LIV Golf is the massive amounts of money they're offering individual players. Just, I think the number 2 player in the world, John Rahm, I've heard this, just signed for a few $100 million to play for LIV. They've been going after guys, let's say, who rank, say, in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 30s, but they've also offered just hundreds of millions to top players and legends like Phil Mickelson. So, who do we think this new LIV Golf Formula One monstrosity, who might they pick off, do you think? Any shockers? Like for example, there's some legends, like I think Vettel kind of regrets leaving when he did. I'm not so sure, say, Kimi Räikkönen does. But, I mean, you look at some of these highly well-known names that are not in the sport. Vettel, Jenson Button, Kimi Räikkönen. Hey, here's $200 million. You think their wives are going to let them turn that down? Here's $200 million to race in our new league. But what about folks who are on the grid now, or reserve drivers, or Indy drivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can't be all that many people that would pass up the chance for a few $100 million. Sebastian Vettel seems like he's maybe one of those people who's a little too righteous for his own good. So he might refuse such a thing. But, I think there's plenty of guys on the grid currently. There's probably a whole bunch of them. I think Perez easily is one of those guys. He's like, you know what? I'm going to get the fuck out of Red Bull. I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm going to go make way more than any of you.
Yeah. Or
I think, like Lance Stroll, he's the only reason he's racing in Formula One is because his dad owns the team. And, it's like, we'll sell that and we'll go make way more in this other venture.
I think
there's plenty of guys, I think, on the grid that would be open to that.
Yeah, because to me, there's guys like Bottas who are quality drivers, well known, that they might not be so tempted, because I think Bottas has always realized his role. He realized his role as the second at Mercedes. I think he realizes his role as just sort of the steady hand at Alfa Romeo. But I think there are some guys, and especially popular ones like, say, Daniel Ricciardo. His talent has dropped off a bit, but I think he still believes he could be a number one somewhere, or, say, drive for Red Bull. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think he could be enticed, but I also am just curious about any shockers. Given some of his statements Lewis Hamilton has made about conditions in the Middle East, might he turn down $1 billion? For example, we know Tiger Woods has, for LIV Golf. Yeah. But what about going after like a top rookie? Like we all think so much now of Oscar Piastri. I don't know what they say. Hey, Oscar, here's $200 million to drive for us.
Yeah, I think Lando, George seems reasonable to me. Alex Albon for sure. There's plenty of guys. I think, we could see easily the return of certain young guys that kind of got booted from their teams. I feel like we could easily see the return of the Russian oligarch-backed Nikita Mazepin, mixing it up, making things interesting. I don't know. I think, like, the whole French team, Alpine, just ports over. They say, you know what, to hell with F1. We're going to go do this somewhere else. We'll take both our drivers with us.
Yes, because I'm thinking like, oh, what driver are they going to pick off? Maybe they could start picking off teams as well. It's like, oh, we're going to get Alpine and let's say McLaren. I mean, McLaren, with Zach Brown, they love the money,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, you're going to be, and I think they probably already have some Saudi ownership stake in there. It's like, hey, McLaren, you're giving up F1. You're going to join our new league, but here's $3 billion. That's a good, yeah. It just seems like the money coming in is just so huge that it's going to be utterly irrational. Like, I'm all for, you don't buy from people who hate you. You try to use your money for good when you can. But, it's like, hey, you set your great-great-grandchildren up to do well. Here's a few $100 million for racing. That becomes a very difficult decision.
Yeah, I think it's really would be really hard to turn down that kind of incentive. I think there's only maybe a few drivers that would be not so inclined, and I think there are very, very few teams who, if offered or were given an offer, would turn that down. I pretty much look at Ferrari and maybe Mercedes as like teams that would be like, you know what? Nah, we're not interested.
Right, because
everyone else, go for it. Well, McLaren, actually, I think it would be hard since they're the second longest tenured team in Formula One. They have a whole history, right? But
yeah, I was thinking the same. Like, because I say McLaren, but they're so intertwined with F1. Ferrari, obviously. Mercedes has got a long history with F1, even though in and out, but a long history, and they already have a lot of money. Red Bull owes so much of its success to Formula One and is so intertwined with F1. That might be another one. But yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe every other team might be like, this makes sense.
In fact, I think probably, like the first team that I would try to pick off would be Williams.
Yeah.
That's like an iconic Formula One brand, but really has no family ownership anymore.
Right.
And they kind of fucking suck right now.
Right.
So
and I
they're
think
like,
they have the
you know
least
what?
amount of money. Yeah. No, that's a good one.
We're out of here. We're, we're a venture capital group that owns this team now. Like, we're gonna go make more money and potentially be, more successful in this new league or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I understand about LIV Golf is for their tournaments are doing some different stuff. So it's at newer courses, I believe. They try to have much more interaction with the fans, more raucous fans, bring in younger fans, really heavily social media focused, but also different types of tournaments. So instead of the 4-day tournament, it's only 3 days. I don't know if they do anything else. Is there anything you think that a LIV Golf takeover of F1 or a competing thing that actually could do better? Everybody seems to complain about sprints, but we watch them. Practices can be boring. As F1's gotten more popular in the last several years, they have gone to newer courses, but maybe different tracks, maybe go all street tracks like Formula E or something. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things that you could do in this type of motorsport, like open-wheeled motorsport, differently than F1. That could be very interesting. There's you can only have so many races in a season. If F1 went to all the tracks that they could go to every year, it would just be outrageous, and there's no reason to put people through that. But there's a lot of really cool tracks that they don't go to anymore, or they're not currently signed up to go to. There's a lot in like Southeast Asia and some of those countries out there that they don't go to anymore. In Vietnam, the Macau track, Jakarta in Indonesia is they do in Formula E, and that's a really cool track. There's lots of really interesting places that they could go to. The other thing I was thinking is, rather than a race to see who can finish the fastest in a set number of laps, is who can finish the most laps in a set amount of time. Kind of, like a mini 24-hour Le Mans, or some race like that, right? Just we're gonna race for 90 minutes. Whoever does the most laps wins. I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of potential ways to make the sport, different enough from F1, but kind of keep the same, I don't know, maybe culture is not the right word, but sort of the same, feeling.
Right. The cars may be very similar still. The pit crews similar still. Yeah, a lot of that. Yeah. What about also, because I just now thought of this, instead of, say, a Red Bull team, a McLaren team, it's, over the, let's say, 20 races of this alternative league, all 5 in the U.S. or in North America are in 5 successive weeks. Mm-hmm. Or, they truly do regionalize it. Or, instead of a Red Bull team, a Mercedes team, we have our American team. We have our Chinese team, our European team, our British team.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, and I think would get very, very competitive. That sounds like it would be fun. I don't know how they would make that happen, but yeah, that would be really cool if they could sort of regionalize the teams. Right now, almost every team in Formula One is, well, all of them are located in Europe, and like 70% of them, I think, are in the UK. So, if there were sort of like regionalized R&D bases, that kind of exist, I think it gives more opportunity to for people to be involved in the sport in other parts of the world, right? 90% probably of people involved in Formula One are European. I think it would be very interesting for more people to have the opportunity to, work in a field like that. And so having these kind of regionalized bases for vehicle development and that kind of thing would be really awesome. If there was a place in North America, somewhere probably in like China or there, could have a South American team, headquartered in Brazil or Argentina or somewhere. I think that would be really fascinating.
So I love that idea, Patrick, of spreading the bases around the world in this sort of alternative F1. Because, as you mentioned, they're now essentially all in Europe and most in England. And you and I love F1. We've been watching it forever. We're fairly traditionalists, I think, even though we sort of embrace the sort of growing Americanness that's happening in the sport. So let's, for a moment, not think of this as a bad thing. What might be some of the upsides to this? Like you said, maybe this could have, we could have 10 plus teams, and they're now with their bases spread around the world. So legitimately, let's say 2 teams in the U.S., 2 in England, 2 in Europe, 1 in the Middle East, 1 in China, 1 in India, 1 in Africa, let's say. Any other thoughts of how this might be better? Obviously, if you're a chosen driver, you're going to make a lot more money. That's better for them. Anything you think might be better for us F1 fans?
Interesting. I there's probably a lot of, or there can be a lot of benefits, I think, to investing a lot in a sport, and particularly in motorsport, just in the sense of overall development, vehicle development, that it can contribute to, engineering or scientific breakthroughs or whatever you want to say. But I think that's really, it could be very valuable. I think Formula One is doing that currently. And a lot of the teams, because they're vehicle manufacturers or associated with vehicle manufacturers, a lot of the development work that they do actually eventually kind of gets through the works and comes down and is actually in vehicles that they end up producing, and can benefit, just overall engineering quality, design, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's
so
a
I
good
think
one. Yeah,
investing all that money is probably could make a positive impact in that kind of way.
Yeah, because that's a good point, because you're giving all these drivers a lot more money, and you're giving us more racing. So as fans, we may think those are good, but yeah, I think that's a great point. It's you're going to have to invest in cars, in teams, wind tunnels, R&D facilities, the new power units. That's a lot of. You're really growing an engineering base, which is great, and really a lot of innovation. I think that might be the best one, because I was thinking, F1's such a tough sport. It's like I don't think, for example, this past year at AlphaTauri, I don't think Nick DeVries got a fair shake. Maybe if he got into this new league, we'd see, wow, he is even better than we thought. Or Liam Lawson, who came in for an engineer in Ricardo, then got booted. He's not coming back in 2024, as far as we know. We might get to see him like, wow, he's a great driver. And then it could extend, as we said, the longevity. What Alonso's doing this past year has been amazing, but maybe he wants to drive until he's 50. I don't know, and maybe he could for this. So yeah. I think that is a great.
I think also it's possible that they could make it easier or cheaper for, say, fans to actually go to races. I know there was a lot of frustration among F1 fans about some of the new races, in particular Las Vegas this year, about how expensive it was for fans to go to those races. So, if there's all this investment, hopefully you would think, this is all theoretical, but hopefully you would think that they would try to make it more accessible to fans as well. They'll have all these races all over the place, but, for anyone that wants to come, it should be hopefully a little bit easier to be able to afford to go to those events.
No, that's a good point. I think another thing is, the world seems finally ready to move toward electric vehicles and building out the technology, the cars, the infrastructure. Took a while. But F1, we love, we love, you know, uh, I mean, they still use gas, you know, these are internal combustion engines somewhat. And there's that tension there of the whole world moving toward electric. And, but, you know, I mean, Christian Horner at Red Bull has said this a lot. We're not going to all electric. And folks who watch Formula E, I mean, look, it's not as good, you know? So that's going to be an interesting test. You know, at what point does Formula One, the real Formula One, go all electric, if ever, versus what, let's say, is a Saudi-backed LIV Golf-type Formula One alternative? And the Saudis, I think, want to keep selling that gas.
Yeah, that's probably true. Formula One is said and continues to kind of push this narrative that they'll be, carbon neutral by 2030 or whatever it is. We're getting pretty close to 2030, and they're not really there yet. They do, or are sort of researching biofuels and, battery technology and things like that to sort of improve the, their carbon footprint, I guess. So it's certainly something that if heavily invested in, there can be technologies, I think, that allow for vehicles to not be exclusively electric, and still kind of, not have the same kind of carbon footprint that a lot of vehicles and still F1 cars have today. So we'll see. I would expect, majority sort of gas powertrain in any kind of Saudi-backed motorsport. But it's certainly something, you can look into how to offset that in some way.
Yeah. Now, related to that, as I started looking into this LIV Golf, there's a controversy over what's being termed sports washing, which is, it's like, look, we know the Saudis have all of their money from oil and gas, essentially, and we want to kind of maybe move away from that type of a future. But the real crux of the issue here is, Saudis are spending billions to have new sports leagues and give these, fund these new sports stars as a way of sort of providing cover for a lot of their social, cultural policies and legal elements that is not aligned with, I would say, is probably the majority of the West's views. And so it's sort of like, you're just spending all this money on sports to make us like you, but we shouldn't like you because of what you stand for. I'm not so sure. I think that's a legitimate issue, or I don't want to say that's not a legitimate issue. I'm just not sure that spending billions on sports will change our views of somebody. Do you have any thoughts on this? Do you think this is a real issue, sports washing? Do you think it's something we should be mindful of? Do you think not? Do you think, let's say, boycotting LIV Golf or something like that, or an F1 alternative, would have an impact? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I don't foresee like any boycotts impacting the overall like result of some of these like sporting ventures. You know, I guess going back to Qatar and the World Cup, you know, there were tons of allegations and problems with how Qatar sort of handled their development of sort of their country and all of these stadiums and things for the World Cup. And yet it was probably once again the most watched sporting event in the world by a long shot. And, you know, people were all upset at how, you know, the country treated migrant workers or, you know, failed to protect the rights of whoever. And yeah, that may go sort of counter to most people's beliefs or what have you. But I'm not so sure that, like, watching that sport makes you forget all of that. So, you know, I say enjoy the sport and figure out how you can actually, like, make an impact yourself. I don't think you need to, like, boycott anything for that kind of reason. So
Awesome. Now, usually at this point of the show, we have a crazy prediction. Usually we're predicting what we think might happen in the next race or the remainder of the season. There is no remainder of this season. It is done. The next race, when is it? It's not in Spain. Is it in Qatar, I think?
Probably.
In March?
Yeah.
Any crazy predictions related to this discussion? Do we think this might happen? Do we think there could be an F1 alternative, a legit funded F1 alternative? Maybe they just, we have this massive amount of new money flowing in that tries to turn Indy into an F1 alternative and take that around the world. It's a reasonably popular sport in America and not very popular outside of America. But it's quite similar. Any crazy predictions on this topic, Patrick?
Crazy predictions. I don't know if I have any crazy predictions. I think it's a possibility. I'm not sure that there's been a very clear push for this to happen yet. I think it could easily turn into something, especially if they can entice some current vehicle manufacturers or engine developers or even current F1 teams to kind of come over. But as of now, I don't see this happening until maybe 2030. So
it's funny. This whole episode really has been a crazy prediction. I don't know if this will happen. I think, like I said, I think golf is unique, and it can take place all year long, all over the world. It doesn't, on courses that are located near everyone. It has 100+ year history. Many of these tournaments. So I don't know if this will happen. I do think people that are inside the sport notice things. So like I said, found out today, California Angels star Ohtani signs a record-breaking contract, $700 million. That means guys who are half as good as him in the sport are talking to their agents. Why the hell don't you have me a $350 million contract? So it's because it doesn't work that way. These things are sort of logarithmic in a sense. The 90th percentile is different than than below it, and then 99th is radically different, and then between 99 and 100 is radically different. So I don't know how this will work out, but I do think, owners of teams, Total Wolf, he's got an ownership stake. Guys running Liberty Media, the new people running Red Bull, they see like, hey, Alpine is getting $1 billion valuation. We're 5 times better and bigger, so we should have at least $5 billion, if not $10 billion. Because they never do the math correctly. So I do think they all pay attention, and I'm going to be, I'm kind of curious where this takes us.
Yeah, I just thought of something else as you were mentioning all of that. This week there was a whole kerfuffle because the FIA, excuse me, accused Susie Wolf, who's like the managing director or whatever of the F1 Academy, of I don't know, like a breach of confidentiality or something. And basically everyone that is even associated with F1 was like, go fuck yourself, FIA. So honestly, my crazy prediction is that there's no offshoot of Formula One. It basically will get taken over and governed by a Saudi-backed investment group. And they changed rules and do all this kind of fun stuff and decentralize F1 and make it more global rather than wholly European.
Wow, so, that is a crazy prediction. I mean, I do, not that I agree with you, but I do think, like I said, it's the third decade of the 21st century. There are certain things that we thought we would have by now, we do not. There are certain realities we thought would be in existence by now that are not. I think the FIA does a good job, but yes, there is quite a sort of an old networked, traditionalist, non-transparency. This is the country club mentality. Meanwhile, Liberty Media owns F1, which means the media rights, and these teams are like paying all this money to FIA. You can say like, hey man, there's a lot of money. We're no longer talking thousands. We're no longer talking millions. We're talking billions. And we're not sure we see why you need to be getting a cut or why you need to have so much of a say. Because big money makes people stupid, but ruthlessly stupid. So, yeah, I don't know. So I'm not going to make a crazy prediction, but I could see like what you're suggesting where there's like it's like somebody, could be Saudis, could be, some massive venture group saying, hey, why do you have to be associated with FIA? How about we make a break here? I don't know, could happen. Also, Susie Wolf, who runs the F1 Academy, the all-female driver, Formula Racing, she's the wife of Total Wolf, who is a part owner and team principal for Mercedes. So that's part of the reason for the kerfuffle. And they were completely cleared. And I think everybody seemed outraged by the fact that they were even questioned, to have their integrity even questioned.
Yep.
All right. I want to remind our listeners, send your questions or comments to hardcompoundpod@gmail.com. We may read them on the show. We definitely will read them. We will get back to a F1 racing episode with our very next episode. And I want to thank you for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.